Good afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. This video is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Do your own research, make your own decisions. All right, guys, welcome back. So just heads up, this is going to be a longer video. It's going to take me a while to get through everything, and I might jump off in a million different directions because this is a very broad, complex topic. And I've already seen other people make many of the common sense points that I would traditionally make in a situation like this. So that was very encouraging. And for anybody who does not know, there was a critique put out on Twitter yesterday about ICP from an individual named Jordan. He's been building on the internet computer for the last, ever since I can remember, ever since I got in ICP. I've been following him. He's one of the 30 or 40 different technical people that I follow pretty closely. So I do value and respect his opinion, and I appreciate the work that him and his team have done up until this point. There is some additional context and perspective I want to add here. And again, this is as broad of a conversation as you could possibly have, because this brings into the conversation all the complexities involved with moving from a Web 2 model to a end-to-end blockchain-based Web 3 model. And that is as big of a conversation as anybody could have. And I don't think, and pause real quick, I'm not trying to mischaracterize, oversimplify, or strawman his position in any way. There will be times in this video where it probably seems like that's what I'm doing, but this is just such a broad conversation with so much nuance that there's so many different angles and perspectives that you could look at this from. And there's so many moving parts that, again, it would just be, I could talk for the rest of the day, and you could even bring some type of technical expert on here, and you probably still wouldn't touch all the different important aspects of this. Okay. That being said, I do think that for newer people coming in, I believe in prioritizing research, meaning that I think that if you're a newer person and you're in your first few months being in the ICP space, I think knowing everything that you can possibly know and understand and comprehend is important, and due diligence and research, I can't overstress the importance of that. That being said, if you're studying a new subject like math or anything, there are certain subjects that are before other subjects, right? There's chapters that are before other chapters for a reason, because the learning process happens on a gradient, right? Incrementally. And certain information is prioritized over other information earlier on when you're learning a new subject. And in my opinion, I think the wisest thing to do for newer people is to research and do your due diligence on all the limitations that everything else has compared to ICP before you start digging into all the limitations of ICP in a vacuum. Because what you might do, and I am more so talking, I want to be very specific. I am more so talking to newer people in their first few months, could be your first 6 months into the ICP space, who do not have a technical background. All right. So for that crowd, I think it would make the most sense for you to fully understand all the differentiating factors that ICP has compared to everything else, and the significance of that, and the use cases that can spawn off of all this additional functionality that ICP has. Okay. And then when you fully get that, and the reason why I'm saying this is because I watch and listen to people talk, and I can clearly see that there's a decent amount of people that still don't fully get and appreciate all the differentiating factors that exist with ICP compared to everything else. And so if you skip over that or kind of discount that, and then you start diving into all the technical limitations of ICP in a vacuum, and you're like, oh man, well, this is a problem, and Dfinity needs to change this, and this isn't going to work, and this isn't going to scale, and this just isn't going to work. And what might happen, and this is just a cautionary message to the group of people that I'm specifically talking to here, what might happen is you do that to such a degree that you find yourself on an inferior network that has a million times more limitations than ICP does, wondering how you got there. And for anybody that finds himself in that situation, I would argue you lost perspective. So those are my thoughts. And I would look at other people who have left the ICP space and where they went, the different networks that they went to. Go look at those networks, okay? And compare those networks to ICP. and ask yourself, is the grass greener? Ultimately, make your own decisions. Nothing's ever a sure thing. This is not financial advice. Do your own research. But I view the gap between ICP and all these other layer ones as being so extreme that until I see something else that even comes close to ICP, and still until I can start using applications that are built end to end on another network, real world applications that I would use on a day-to-day basis, then there's not even going to be a thought in my mind about doing much of anything. Because back to points that I've made, and so many things that I'm going to be saying in this video are points that I have been making for 2 years or more. Okay, because my primary focus is one on the broader adoption trend with blockchain and distributed ledger systems, and whether or not I believe that's going to continue. And everything that I've seen up until this point over the last few years would suggest to me that that is going to continue, even though nothing's ever a sure thing and anything could change at any point in time. And so if that is the direction this is going to go, then within the blockchain industry, within that entire sector, right, I want to look for technologies that are different from other things in the space and that offer overwhelmingly more value and functionality than other things in the space, and that may or may not be undervalued relative to the rest of the market. And for me, it was very clear over 2 years ago that the answer was ICP for a lot of reasons, but for the most basic primary reason, which I can't stress enough, if you ignore this, you might find yourself in that situation that I described earlier. You can build applications end to end on ICP as a full stack solution, and you can't elsewhere. Not just that. I mean, there's a million other things as well. Okay. So out of all, think about how many different blockchain networks exist. Tons, over 100. Think about all the teams involved that created all those technologies. And out of all of those different blockchain networks and all of those teams all around the world, all of the expertise, all the funding, all the resources, all those different teams had, there was one team that was able to create a full stack solution end to end on chain where you can build and use applications. Not just that, they can integrate natively with other networks and sign transactions on other networks. And that opens up a whole nother million doors of possibilities, in my opinion. But out of all the teams and all the different networks, there was one that you can actually build and use applications. And so as long as the broader adoption process continues forward, and as long as that remains the case, as long as I see a giant gap between ICP and everything else, then I have no reason to even remotely change my position. So ICP can have current limitations today and still be light years ahead of everything else. And to some of Jordan's points, so I would recommend people just going and reading his review for yourself. But he's more or less looking at ICP as it exists today and saying these are the limitations, and here are the use cases where this is going to be a problem. And based on these limitations, which some of them stem back from, in his point of view, architectural and design issues. Based on these limitations, these use cases more or less won't be scalable. Again, don't want to oversimplify. Go read it for yourself. It's on Twitter. But all the limitations that were listed are all ones that I've been aware of, and I think other people have been aware of too. Maybe not everybody, but at least those of us who have been around for a while. And for me personally, I fully expect to see limitations today, 3 years into a 20+ year roadmap. Back to an earlier point in the video, because the operation, the initiative here is as big as anything that you can take on. Reinventing the web on chain, you understand everything involved with that? Because I don't even understand everything involved with that. I can ballpark it, but there's so many moving parts here. So I'm looking at this 3 years into a 20+ year roadmap. I fully expect, based on where we are today, if you look at the limitations and everything as far as how it's set up right now, I'm extrapolating out expecting new solutions, new innovation. And let's just say that ICP is not the most ideal destination for certain use cases. Again, perfectly fine. We've already had this conversation. Personally, I view ICP sitting here today, March 2024, as being the best candidate in the world for a global payment solution, especially when you take into account that you can build in an identity solution too with ICP, and especially when you take into account they have a built-in governance system. And so if you were just thinking about what would the most ideal global payment system look like, I think ICP right now could become the best candidate for a global payment system and or identity solution, which I think is going to be almost necessary in the not too distant future. On top of that, too, there was actually, I don't want to jump ahead, but there's so many guys. I think ICP can become the biggest thing in the world if it just is one of the main solutions for 25 to 30% of the total use cases that we're talking about. I think it could become the biggest thing in the world just with that alone. And another part that we're really getting into the nuance here. So, and I've been consistent on this the entire channel, right? What did I always say? Going back 2 years were some of the last things that I thought was going to happen on the new version of the web. Us fully transitioning over to end-to-end blockchain-based social media platforms and institutions fully transitioning over to end-to-end blockchain-based enterprise systems. Those have always been the last two things that I said I expect to see because of all the complexities involved with that. If you look at a simple use case, payments theoretically could go live at mass adoption scale sooner than, let's say, everybody moving to blockchain-based social media platforms. There's just different moving parts and different complexity involved with certain use cases at certain stages. And so I view this as being a gradual incremental process. I'm not thinking with how are we going to get to mass adoption within a very short time period on every single use case. I'm viewing the use cases that are most mass adoption ready being mass adopted earlier and over time as more networks continue to build out their infrastructure, as more development happens, as a lot of limitations are innovated away, as those limitations that can't be innovated away, as just other solutions are created to serve for that use case. Again, ICP doesn't have to do every single use case 100% end-to-end on ICP to become the biggest thing in the world. The fact that it's a leading candidate for so many different use cases, you're casting, or at least in my personal opinion, I'm casting the widest net imaginable as an investor. Imagine investing in some place where it's only a currency. They're only going for the currency play, or they're only going for the supply chain play. Some entire blockchains and cryptos, they're literally, they openly announce that they really just have one use case, one target market. The amount of potential use cases with ICP, it's growing by the week, okay? It's growing by the week. Think of that image that a lot of us share, just talking about all the different use cases that are already available on ICP right now. That list is just going to grow. You're going to be able to roll it out the door. Meanwhile, it's mostly going to stay the same with everything else because their core, most rudimentary function is as a database, as a ledger, as a payment system, as pay rails, however you want to refer to it. But it's night and day when you compare something like that to ICP. And another thing too, Dfinity, I think a lot of times people's default assumption is that Dfinity should be openly broadcasting every single thing that's going on behind the scenes with development, with R&D, with potential corporate partnerships, working with new institutions, right? And I just think that's unrealistic. I mean, I think based on the amount of information, I think Dfinity puts out plenty of information alone, but I also understand the processes involved when institutions, certain software institutions, I understand Dfinity is a nonprofit and it's more so a DAO-based model, so there is some, some nuance with that. But like I understand the process of working with an institution and them potentially onboarding your software platform and the amount of confidentiality that comes along with that. And like if Dfinity was working with, let's say, certain smaller nation states or large institutions, that can't be openly discussed until both parties agree on it, right? And so I do think to some degree it's a bit naive to expect Dfinity to just openly broadcast a lot of things that may not be in their best interest to broadcast it at that point in time. And it may not be in any of our best interests as investors, as users, as developers. We don't know everything that's happening with the internal conversations with a lot of people at Dfinity. And I know Dfinity is not ICP, and I get it. I'm just saying that they're the main contributors to ICP, and they have the largest R&D team in the blockchain space in the world. And we're not always going to know and be privy to certain real-time conversations they are having, especially as it relates to potentially working with governments, corporations, so on and so forth, because both parties would have to be in agreement for certain things to be announced and shared publicly. And that's just normal. That's the way business is done. And so I do think that there's probably a lot of things that they haven't released yet that will be released in the future. But again, I'm looking at this on a 20-year roadmap. I don't expect everything to be fully complete and ready 3 years in. And I've never remotely suggested that. If you just look at the expectations that I have generally set for this, just as far as my own outlook and my own thesis, but always said, expect the most basic use cases to go live earlier. I expect the more complex use cases that there's more moving parts, like us all moving over to Web3 social media end-to-end on-chain, and institutions starting to migrate to end-to-end blockchain-based enterprise systems. For a very long time, I've openly been saying I think those are some of the last things that happen because there's just more moving parts, right? But that I expect this to be a long, gradual, transitionary process. If you try to do any drastic things with trying to accelerate adoption of of software in a short period of time, and you don't have the infrastructure in place and you don't have the scaling solutions in place, it's just not going to work. You would have to gradually, incrementally build all of those things out while you're gradually, incrementally onboarding new people. So it happens as a process over a longer period of time as opposed to all at once. But what are your other options? Other layer ones where you can't build and host applications? If that's what you feel like is best for you, knock yourself out. I'm just saying that if the mindset is, well, there's a lot of limitations here with ICP, so let's look elsewhere. Okay, cool. There's more limitations elsewhere in all reality. I personally have no concerns myself, and I think that the current limitations that exist today, that there will be additional workarounds. I think things like Utopia and specialized subnets are going to address some of the issues that were raised with Jordan. and for other issues that were raised and potential use cases that may impact if certain use cases are not ideal on ICP 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now, after the tech has had an opportunity to develop, evolve, innovate, after the infrastructure has continued to be built out, then in my opinion, ICP can still become the biggest thing in the world, even if it's not doing every single use case 100% end-to-end on ICP. I've always described this as a ICP more so as the hub, but as a lot of supporting technologies around ICP, because there's so many moving parts. There's so many different types of use cases, so much complexity involved with each one of those. It's just a very broad conversation. But my money is on the people at Dfinity. That's the largest R&D team in the blockchain space. If there are going to be solutions created for complex problems like the ones that have been raised, I have my money on those guys, okay? Because they have the most expertise, they have the most talent, and they just have the biggest R&D team in the blockchain space, okay? So if certain developers and engineers have ideas or suggestions, they should always feel free to express those and try to propose changes. I would be interested to know if proposals have already been submitted for this, or if this critique came before certain proposals. I don't know. I would be interested in that. Like, has Jordan already submitted proposals for this and they just got rejected, and that's why he's now bringing these issues up publicly? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm ultimately going to decide with Dfinity on most technical issues. Maybe not all, but most technical issues. It depends on the issue. And guys, it's important to look at people's expectations, right? Like, because that's all personalized to the individual. And I might have just different expectations than you. You might have different expectations than Jordan. Jordan might have different expectations than another one. You know what I mean? It's like our outlook and what we were expecting out of this whole entire situation might be drastically different person to person, based on research, based on prior conversations we had, just based on our thesis that we thought was going to play out over time, right? And because for somebody who expected to see limitations 3 years in, I have no real concerns because I expected to see limitations 3 years in. They're actually further along than what I thought they were going to be in a number of different areas in all reality. Because I can make sense of the fact that they're trying to redesign the web end to end on an open sovereign network using blockchain technology, and just the amount, the size of that operation is just so massive that it just warrants a much bigger conversation with a much broader range of perspectives, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm going to side with Dfinity on most technical issues at the end of the day. Because the way that I look at this, guys, is that if there was another team out there, because everybody can have ideas and suggestions and feedback, but if there was another team out there that could create a better solution than ICP, do it. I want to see it. Those are my thoughts on that. The way certain things are handled will have an effect. This applies to me. This applies to you. This applies to everybody. The way you handle certain things will have an impact. It will either be a positive or a negative, maybe neutral, but the way certain things are handled do have an impact. ICP does not need to do 100% of every single use case to be the biggest thing in the world, in my opinion. And I fully expect the modern limitations to be developed / innovated away over time. And if all of them can't be, then I expect supporting technologies to be built around to fill the gaps. Okay? But I go back to the core part of the thesis, which is the broader technology, blockchain distributed ledger systems moving forward to mass adoption, institutions continuing to adopt this tech. And I see ICP as the hub for this. and a lot of other supporting technologies around ICP, more so as extensions of ICP. And I think this is going to take place over a 20-year time period. And now that artificial intelligence is already starting to be able to program, guys, honestly, I think any one person is going to have a difficult time telling you what the future is going to look like. I think we're going to get to the point to where AI evolves, and it's not in the next like 5 years. I think we're going to get to the point to where AI evolves to a certain degree that it's going to be difficult for a normal person to look and try to forecast out where things are going to be 5, 10, 20 years from now. Because there's a variable involved here that has never existed before, that nobody's ever had to account for before, that can drastically change most every single aspect of day-to-day life when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And so while I know that sitting here today, March 2024, certain things like might not look possible or doable or this or that and the other, I do think I've just seen technology evolve and develop over time. And I was on dial-up as a kid, and I'm in my mid-30s, and now there's like I'm looking at what Boston Dynamics is doing, and I'm looking at OpenAI, and they can create videos of events that never happened with people that don't exist, and those things look real. They can write entire books, movie scripts. You look at what is it, Hanson Robotics and Sophia. So it's I've seen technology progress at a mind-bending pace in my lifetime, and I'm only in my mid-30s. So, yes, I understand there are technical limitations sitting here today, but I think the incentive structure to move to a model like this is so great for almost all institutions. And I think that that is reinforced when you look at the amount of institutions starting to use blockchain and distributed ledger systems. And another thing, too, is that to Jordan's point about he said the main thing going for ICP is ownership. And then he said within a 3-minute period, I think, it was a short condensed period. He said the main thing going for ICP is ownership. And then he also said that it would make sense that where this was all going was everything being tokenized, that would make sense. I would argue that I don't even necessarily disagree with either one of those two things. They weren't necessarily said in the same context. But so if ownership is the main thing going for ICP, and if people would assume that we're moving to an environment where everything is tokenized, why wouldn't like important assets like their digital twins, if everything's going to be tokenized, why wouldn't those important things be stored on chain to offer true ownership to the owners? Seems like a pretty important use case, right? Do we have any examples of that? Oh, yes, we do, with Metalure, one of the largest precious metal refiners in the world, right? And so I would imagine the team at Metalure did a pretty thorough evaluation process when they were looking at ICP, at the architecture, at the technology. I would imagine the people at COP8 did a pretty thorough job when they were looking at ICP, because the VRC platform is supposed to be a global platform for a lot of different institutions, not just for COP28. It's supposed to be a platform used by institutions. And so I imagine they have, and they did a decent amount of due diligence when they were looking into ICP, right? And so if somebody were to see everything going to like a tokenized economy, web, everything, and you were to look at the degree of ownership that's possible on ICP because everything is end-to-end on chain and because there's an open governance system at the network and the application level, if you were to believe both of those things to be real, like ownership on ICP and we're moving to a tokenized economy, I don't know how you don't automatically see ICP as one of the most ideal destinations for those digital twins and more or less real world assets to be stored on ICP to offer true ownership. Like that was the first thing I thought about. I was like, well, that's automatically, that would make sense why ICP would be used. And it's already being used for very similar use cases with Metalore, not just with that, with federality. And one more thing. This was the comment kind of made me have a little bit of a change of heart, if I'm being honest. And then I listened to a few minutes of the spaces last night, and that probably played into this as well. And again, I do respect and appreciate everything Jordan has done and his team. And, you know, if he does have, I don't know the status of everything. I don't know if he's already submitted proposals and they've just been rejected, and that's why he's saying things publicly now. You know, Jordan's always had certain critiques and things of ICP, but you know, I view everything in its own like situation based on like the details involved. And Jordan's critiques are different than just Dfinity's doing a bad job, they need to do something different, right? It's like these are more detailed, thorough, and in many cases, they're very accurate with what he's saying about the technical limitations that exist right now. And so I actually appreciate following him. But then again, I have unshakable conviction. There's nothing that Jordan's going to say on Twitter is going to cause me to flip bearish on ICP. I wouldn't give a good fuck if he came out today and posted a 2-hour long video explaining why ICP isn't going to work and it's destined for failure in the next 6 months. I'd probably watch and listen just to see what the points that he was making and the validity to them. But it wouldn't make one damn bit of difference to me. So for me, I still enjoy following him because I like to know and understand the limitations and the use cases associated with those limitations. But again, for newer people, I just defer back to everything I said at the beginning of my video. But this was, and this is on that thread, if you want to go look at it for yourself. The other gentleman who's also like a developer, software engineer, building solutions on ICP, I like that guy too. He was commenting to Jordan, and then Jordan replied with, you know, the preceding comment, which I should have probably started with that, was more so along the lines of not everything has to happen on ICP. ICP doesn't have to do everything, 100% of every single use case. Certain things can happen with other technologies. ICP can be utilized for XYZ. That was the general context of what of this comment. And so he said, but that was not the vision I was sold. This is not the blockchain singularity. This is not an unbounded virtual machine. Look through everything Dominic said on the purpose of ICP. It's to be a world computer where everything is run with these BFT-like guarantees. If it's not a worthy vision, that's another conversation to have. That is the vision that convinced me to join the ICP ecosystem. Now, when I read that, okay, and I listened to bits and pieces of the spaces last night, when I read that, okay, to some degree, that does seem like certain expectations were set, and now the reality of the situation does not align with the expectations, right? And that very much seems like a Jordan and Dfinity thing, and whatever prior conversations that they had. For me, my expectations were aligned with where we are, right? And so that's why I couldn't be more thrilled. I couldn't be more bullish and optimistic for the future, because the expectations I had for 2024 align with where we are. And if you would have been watching this channel dating back 2 years, your expectations would likely align with what you're seeing right now. If you were watching my channel. That's why like a lot of OGs on this channel are not going to be shaken out of ICP. They've seen too much. They've seen this whole thing evolve from the time that I started covering it to right now. And it's like they're just not going to be shaken out. But what I'm seeing today aligns with my expectations of what I would expect to see. And in all reality, there are certain things that are further along than what I expected. And but this very much reads like there were certain expectations, and now the reality of the situation does not align with those expectations, and there is some degree of frustration. If that's the wrong way to interpret this, okay, but that's kind of how it read to me, because I can look at this as an investor and say ICP can become the biggest thing in the world, even if it never fully fulfills the end-to-end blockchain-based Web3 model, blockchain singularity vision. It can still become by far the biggest thing in the world, and it can still be the most important technology on Earth, even without that. If it just consumes and is the main solution for 20, 30, 40% of use cases globally, it's probably going to be the biggest thing in the world, in my opinion. And I think it will, even if it doesn't check every single box for every single use case. I don't like a lot of times the framing that happens, not saying that Jordan did this, and I don't think that he did do this. I just seen this elsewhere. Um, if XYZ doesn't happen, you know, if Dfinity doesn't change this and this and this, then this isn't going to work. I would just throw out a cautionary message that when you start seeing stuff like that, I'm going to tell you the progression. It starts with first, this is a problem, right? And then this is a problem, this is a problem that gets continued for a period of time. And then it's, well, this needs to happen to fix this problem. Here's the solution for this problem. And then it's Dfinity needs to adopt this solution to fix this problem. And then that continues for a period of time. And then it goes to, well, if Dfinity doesn't fix this problem, then it's not going to get fixed, and this just isn't going to work. That's normally the natural progression to how a lot of these conversations start. And I say that as somebody who's been watching this for 2.5 years. I'm not saying that this is the way that's going to go. I'm just saying, be aware of that. Because what if Dfinity doesn't change the different things that Jordan suggested? What then? Is everybody going to go to Arweave, Ethereum, Solana? You know what I mean? It's like, what if Dfinity's like, no, we're not changing anything. We're good. We got it figured out. At least our part. Again, Dfinity and ICP are separate. But we've already thought through all these things as the largest R&D team in the blockchain space in the world. And solutions are being created. And where we are right now, the functionality exists to do what we need to do. Those later use cases, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years from now, we'll cross that hurdle when we get there because we've already thought about that. And solutions will be put in place to make certain things possible. It's like we don't know all the internal conversations that have happened at Dfinity. And at the end of the day, again, I think with artificial intelligence and the degree to which artificial intelligence is going to, here's the thing, guys, artificial intelligence will be able to do more and more things with writing software code as this evolves. And at that point in time, I think any one person is going to probably have their own personal limitations with telling you what's going to be possible in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, because what's going to be possible in 5 years from now will largely be dictated by the advancement of AI and not by people's opinions. That's all I have for this video. ICP can have current modern day limitations and still be light years beyond everything else. And the gap between ICP and everything else really be this wide, but it still have limitations. Two things can be true. At the end of the day, ICP is the only network right now where, as a full stack solution, you can build and use applications end to end on their network, on an open sovereign network. on-chain, where you have real ownership, where there's governance at the network and the application level. And so until I see something that even remotely comes close to this, I have no reason to change my position. That being said, look at this for yourself, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions. This was not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Do your own research. Take care. Have a good day. I'll see you in the next video.